Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I am delighted to be joined by Benjamin Niaulin, Head of Product at ShareGate Canada, who will be talking to you about the complete guide to Office 365 Group Administration. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC19. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is packed with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit SharePointEurope.com and click the content link. Join us at ESPC 19. Our call for speakers is now open at SharePointEurope.com. This is your chance to help drive the profession forward. Build your own profile and contribute to the community's success by sharing your experience and insights with your peers. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have for Benjamin in the questions window. Some questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and will be added to the Resource Center, where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Benjamin Niaulin. Hello, Benjamin.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Shane, for inviting me today. I would just like to first thank you for inviting me. Before we even begin, I know it might be the morning for some of you. It is for me. It might be the afternoon and the evening. So we're all over talking about Office 365 groups administration. And I really want to dive into it with you today. Before we begin, again, thank you, ESPC. I'm super excited to be going to the next conference in Prague. Been going to ESPC for many years now. I think first one in 2013 or whenever Copenhagen was the first one, and ever since then for the conversations, mostly between people, between speakers, between all the people that are focused on Office 365 and just trying to get things done. So don't hesitate. If you want to ask some questions, as you mentioned, go open the questions box. Let's chat. Ping me afterwards on LinkedIn or on Twitter. If you have questions you want to post directly on Twitter and have others participate as well, don't hesitate. More than happy to. My goal here is for us to share information and grow in the Office 365 space. So it usually starts like this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we usually have this grand idea. Let's move to Office 365, right? So we do this migration, or we start directly in Office 365. And typically speaking, we'll go through some kind of checklist, right? Either you download a migration checklist, or you build your own, you set up your project, you've got your milestones, and your only focus is to migrate. You're not worried about deploying teams. You're not necessarily worried about Office 365 groups and how they can bring new opportunities and how you should control them or manage them in that new space. You really focused on how can I prepare my migration, how can I make sure that I migrate as fast as possible without errors, and then validate that everything went well. And that really is the focus at the beginning. So what I'm seeing in many situations, if not all, and as you mentioned, I work at ShareGate, so we do see a lot of migrations and see a lot of behavior in there of what people actually and how they migrate. And what we're seeing is, when moving from on-premises to Office 365, typically speaking, what I'm seeing is this model. You go from on-premises, where the hierarchy is top-down, and I'm not talking about your org model, I'm talking about your site collections, right? You have that one site collection or multiple site collections, but a lot of subsites. The project site collection and a new subsite for every project. The customer site collection and a new subsite for every customer, and so on and so on. Using classic SharePoint, you're focused on Exchange, you're focused on SharePoint, you're focused on Office. You have complete control over the deployment of your SharePoint experience. If you want to move to a different version of SharePoint on premises, you control that. If you want to enable certain site collections, You control when people get it, thus change management, communication, and the training that goes with it. You have complete control over that rollout. Now, sometimes that means that rollout's going to take 3 years, but sometimes it means that you can do it exactly the way that you do it. What's interesting, by the way, is I was talking to a customer a long time ago, and they came up to us and they said, look, we're doing a migration, but we have a huge environment. I don't know if you're going to be able to help us. We have, wait for it, 4 site collections. And I was like, okay, that doesn't sound like a lot to me. 4 site collections, that's quite, that's not that much. But for that customer to reach 4 site collections, because everything was so vertical, everything was so subsite, that it was unimaginable to reach 4 site collections. That means they were a huge company with thousands of end users using SharePoint. Now we do our migration, we move to Office 365, but I call this hosted by Office 365, or if you will, online. When you're talking, if you use the words SharePoint Online or Exchange Online, then typically speaking, you're probably still exactly like you were on premises, but now your servers are being taken care of by somebody else. The patching is faster, the upgrades are faster, you don't have to worry about a number of things, but you're still in a top-down model. You're still going with subsites, you're still using classic SharePoint, or maybe you switch some sites to modern. You got all of the benefits of Office 365 in the cloud. Rather, you switch from operational expense versus capital expense, where before you would be doing this big plan, justify a purchase of new servers and licenses, and then you're good to go for another 3 to 4 years and you deploy them. Operational expense, now you have to justify cost and ROI over the service that you provide on a monthly basis. And of course, you get benefits of security. So essentially, things are changing where in Office 365, but also how we work, we are in many cases on the right side where we're top down, where we wait and we request and we get something, where on the left-hand side is the, how can I say, the vision that Microsoft has for how people work. Now, whether it's with technology or without, there's 2 facades to this. There's the how we're going to change our culture, and then we hear and we see HR trying to change company cultures in many cases. And you also have the technology that can support a model where we democratize, we decentralize information so that everyone can build what they need, get the work done that they need to get work done. And that's where the transformation happens. I think that gray line in the middle is really where a journey takes place, a decision, a mindset that changes. And this is where we're here today, where you're possibly already on the orange rectangle. You're probably already using Modern Workplace, and you've got teams going on, and you've got Office 365 groups all over the place. And you see that it's self-service, you see that it's decentralized, you see that there's no top-down structure, that everything is flat. There's site collections, but no subsites. There's different security models. There's multiple products that you have to manage. Or you're in the blue box, you finished your migration, you're in the online model of work in Office 365. So you're using Exchange Online and SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business. And now you're thinking, I want to adopt this new way of work that Microsoft's talking about. I want to deploy Microsoft Teams. I want to deploy Office 365 groups. I want to see about self-service and control it. But I want to figure out what's the best approach to make sure I don't lose control and wake up with content sprawl all over the place, and then be accountable for compliance, regulations, or security breaches that happen and not know what's going on. So essentially, I find there's a couple of steps. These are main topics, and don't worry, we're going to dive into the 300 level of what you can do to set up and configure your administration of groups. But I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. What are groups? What's happening? What stage of the life cycle to the adoption of groups you are at, or where everyone can be? And then some major topics here of what you can do to start figuring out how to change some of the things we do. First, you got to make sure you go from classic to modern. This is going to be a big one because Office 365 groups is modern SharePoint. And that really is classic to modern SharePoint, but it'll also be classic to modern in the way we approach problems. And I'll talk about that in the last one, IT team to product team. The second one is intent-driven versus technology-driven. What I mean by that is before we would say, here's a SharePoint site, whatever you got to do, try to figure it out and fit it in the technology that we have. What Microsoft is approaching now is something called intent-driven. That's me calling it that. Don't ask Microsoft; they probably have never heard of that. But what I mean by intent-driven is we try to shape the technology to the intent that our teams have, that a group of people have. What are they trying to achieve? There's this free book online that I cannot stop recommending. It's called Jobs to be Done. There's multiple frameworks for jobs to be done. My favorite one is from an author called Ulrich. Typically speaking, I think you can find the book on a website called Strategine with a Y. And it's a free book that you can download. And the framework, it's actually something you can put in place. It's not just a book about theory. It's a framework that's typically for software companies or product companies. But as Satya Nadella said in 2015 at Ignite, soon, in a future not too distant, every company is now a software company. It doesn't matter what you do, you're changing everything. Even if you're IT serving your customers, your not employees, but colleagues, you're ultimately shifting into a software company, right? If you're a company that sells food, typically speaking, you'll try to see how can I monitor the tracking of what food works, what doesn't? How can I make a website that people can order easily? How can I make payment automated in there? You are a software company. And thinking about jobs to be done, that framework focuses on what people are trying to achieve. What is the job that people are trying to get done? And then providing the right experience and the right service for it. And this is what Office 365 Groups is trying to do. Don't force people into a technology, but rather give them everything they need. So depending on their intent, whether they're trying to gather notes, whether they're trying to communicate outside of their group of people, they can use the right tools that help with their intent. I think the real challenge for us, and the one we're going to focus on today, is cross-product governance. You used to have to manage just one product, Exchange, SharePoint, which you had the time to go for a 5-day training course at a training center, or you went to an amazing conference in Prague in 2018, or whatever you did, you gathered the information. Then you went back to the office and you deployed the product exactly the way you want it, in the controlled way you want it. This is not the case anymore. Now there's many products and there's going to be new ones all the time. And on top of that, you don't deploy them. Microsoft does, and they keep updating them. So how can you stay on top of governing all of these products and the intent of people while maintaining a good experience for everyone? So before we even dive into the administration side, I just want to make sure everyone understands the difference between classic SharePoint. So when I'm talking about classic SharePoint, sometimes people confuse classic SharePoint with a version of SharePoint. They assume that because I say classic SharePoint, it must be SharePoint 2013 or on-premises. This is not the case. Classic SharePoint refers back to a UI, a look and feel of SharePoint that has been stopped. But classic SharePoint is available in SharePoint 2010, SharePoint 2013, SharePoint 2016, SharePoint 2019, and on SharePoint Online via Office 365. So classic SharePoint is always there almost across every version, but it refers to an older UI, older look and feel of SharePoint that has no longer any improvements made. Microsoft stopped at this point in time. And it's not really just the UI, because the UI also means certain features, certain ways of working. Now they put a stop in time and they said, we need to stop doing this SharePoint. We need to bring it to the next century. What we're going to do is we're going to build modern SharePoint. And modern SharePoint is probably the one you've seen. I've taken the screenshot since then. It's changed, and it's going to change all the time. You have communication sites as well. It's a new look and feel of a SharePoint site, but it's not a version. I can have modern SharePoint on premises with SharePoint 2019, and I can have modern SharePoint online with Office 365. It has nothing to do with location of your SharePoint server or the version of your SharePoint server. It's simply the look and feel and the features available to work with for end users. How's everybody doing? You got your coffee, or if it's late, your beer? All right, let's continue. I think we've got through the basics. We understand what's happening. Now you've got a new challenge when you move to modern SharePoint. The challenge is the flat earth theory. Essentially, and this is changed over here, Microsoft has modified the top left one. So do not take a screenshot or note of the top left one, but I left it there purposely. People always ask me, well, why don't you change the slide? Because it's very, very important to understand the mindset that Microsoft has and their direction. Now, a lot of people complain, so they brought it, but let me get to the story first. Essentially, Microsoft is recommending and has been recommending that you approach a flat physical hierarchy. Often we confuse the two. That people tell me, well, no, I have the marketing department. Under the marketing department, I have other teams. It needs to be under the marketing department. Or I have HR, and under HR, I want to create the administrative thing, and it needs to be under the HR department. I want the vacation request site. It needs to be under the. It doesn't have to physically. And what Microsoft is trying to say is, stop physically putting subsites. Stop physically doing a top-down structure. And they're going to provide you a way to do it logically using information architecture, using basically a mega menu, some hub sites, and some navigation. I'll dive into hub sites in just a few moments. But essentially, Microsoft originally, and just recently changed this, blocked the ability to create subsites on modern SharePoint. They're trying to force us to go to this model. Office 365 groups only work with top-level sites. So you have to understand that if you want to deploy Office 365 groups, your first question is, how do I flatten my environment? If you want to leverage what you have already, what are the steps that you're going to take your top-down site levels, your subsite number 17, and turn it into an Office 365 groups, which mean it has to become a root site collection, ideally with no subsites. And what you'll have to do is, when you have that entire flat architecture, you'll have to think about, where do hub sites fit? A hub site is not, I repeat, a hub site is not a type of site or site template. It's a setting on an existing site collection that you choose. You can take any team site, any Office 365 groups, but typically speaking, we recommend using a communication site. And then you add a tag to them saying it's a hub now. Some things change to that site, bringing it a new navigation, some little other features, force theming, not too much. The more important thing is, when you're going to create those other Office 365 groups that are flat across your environment, you can say they belong to this hub site without physically putting them under it. What happens is an environment like this, right? You have your hub sites, you have site collections and communication sites, and then you can move them around easily. This is why Microsoft did this, is because often we need to reorganize and restructure our environment. There's a reorg, there's mergers, there's acquisitions, there's changes within teams, and you want to be able to take your sites and move them around without having to rethink the structure of your sites and your content types and everything around that. Susan Hanley, an amazing MVP, also speaker at the European SharePoint Conference, does this article with Microsoft at the hyperlink that you see below that helps you, a full guidance document that helps you plan your hub sites in your information architecture, in your environment. I cannot stop recommending it enough. It is great documentation. All right. So very quickly, I always have a little bug with this image. What is an Office 365 group? It's a number of things. What I'm going to do is I'm going to skip this slide. This is the Microsoft slide, and that's why I never use the Microsoft slide. I use mine. This is the clearest way I could put as what is the definition of an Office 365 group. How's everybody doing? You still good? All right. Enjoy. It's just a webinar. We're talking. It's Office 365 groups. Our goal is really exchange some ideas, exchange some information. Don't hesitate at any time, whether on Twitter or on the questions box. Let's get the conversation started, and we'll get through all of this together. So what is an Office 365 group? This is very interesting because the way Microsoft approached it from their marketing perspective, it was confusing. What is a group? Is it a group? Is it a group? Is it a team? What is a team? What is a group? Let's take a breath. Let's take a pause. Do you remember, I hope so, Active Directory, right? In Active Directory, forget SharePoint servers, forget everything SharePoint. Go back 10 years and think about your file shares. Maybe you don't even have to go back 10 years. Maybe you just have to go back to yesterday. File shares. You have your share drive, maybe your P drive, your G drive, or H drive, or whatever. And in there, some people put folders. This is content. This is objects that can be secured, right? If you create a folder that you want to secure, what are you going to do next? You're going to right-click Properties. You're going to go to Security tab. And then you're going to grant a security group access to the folder with the right access. So you may say, I want to grant the managers group full access to this folder. What Microsoft said is, we're going to create a new type of Active Directory security group. Whenever you hear someone say Office 365 group, technically, at the technical and functional level, what they're talking about is a new type of group in Active Directory. Right next to your security groups, right next to your distribution groups, now there's a new type of group in Active Directory called Office groups. Literally, we're going to go and open, let's do it right now actually, because I'm getting bored of PowerPoint slides. If I am in my Active Directory for my tenant, so I open up Azure because now you're using Azure Active Directory. Some of you may tell me, no, I'm not using Azure Active Directory, I'm using federated on-premises. Yes, regardless of what Active Directory setup you have, an Office 365 tenant, always mandatory, no exceptions in the entire world, comes with its own Active Directory. You may not use it, but typically speaking, it's the one where you have the name of your tenant, .onmicrosoft.com, that comes by default, always. And if you click on Azure Active Directory, under groups, you will see all of your security groups, and you will see all of your Office 365 groups. Let's go back into my Office 365 tenant, and let's say I want to go to SharePoint, and I want to create a new Office 365 group. And Office 365 groups can be created from whichever tenant you want. So I'll click on Create Site. Something's going to pop up on the side. Do I want to create a team site or a communication site? Notice that if you click Team Site, it says that it's going to be connected, important word, to an Office 365 group. That means that the source object is the group itself, and the team site for SharePoint is going to be connected to the Office 365 group. So let's go with it. Let's give it a name. ESPC 18 proc. 19, wow. No one told me. It's because maybe everybody's muted. So I can see that it's generating a name, checking for availability, checking the email address, checking for availability. And then a number of other questions that I'll go through. We can go, now I'll come back to them and click on next. It's creating the site. And that's actually not entirely true. The first thing it's doing, it's creating a group, and then it's creating the site and attaching it to the group. Finish. Now, what happens? I have this new team site from SharePoint that's connected to an Office 365 group. If I go to Azure Active Directory, right, I didn't refresh the page yet. So if I go to the E section, you can see that I do not have an ESPC 19 prog in my Office 365 groups. Let's refresh. There's a new security group in my Active Directory that's been created. This is what Office 365 groups are. They're basically a way to create a new security group in today's world of the cloud. So first, the group is created, and the purpose of the group is to provide a centralized membership for users in your environment. So you created the ESPC 2019 Prague team site or Office 365 group. You add users inside of it. You add external user, what they call guests, inside of your Office 365 group. And then essentially what happens next is Microsoft created a script that automates the creation of all the different products that exist under a category that Microsoft calls productivity. What does a team of people, what does a group of people trying to get work done need? The script goes and walks to something called Exchange Online. And it says, hey, I have a security group of people. I have a group of people. What do they need from you to get work done? So the Exchange server says, well, I can give them a mailbox, and a mailbox will give them the availability to send and receive email, as well as navigate through a calendar and check what's going on and centralize it to the group itself. This I absolutely love, because now the calendar is not linked to one person that's organizing the meetings for the entire team, and then that person is not there. We need to make edits to the calendar, or that person leaves and then we have to remake the calendar from scratch. This doesn't happen anymore, because the calendar and the mailbox is actually belongs to the security group itself instead of an individual user. Then it navigates to SharePoint, and it says, hey, SharePoint, I've got a new group of people here that want to get work done. What would you recommend? What would you give them for them to get work done? SharePoint will say, well, what I would do is I would give them a site collection, brand new. And since I'm doing modern SharePoint now, I'll give you a modern SharePoint site collection, right? So SharePoint doesn't care about Office 365 groups and not. SharePoint either has a team site template or a communication site template. The only thing that changes is if you choose team site, it generates the group, which then generates the SharePoint team site template and all of the other products. There's no way for you to say, I don't want the planner, or I don't want the Outlook. It always comes together as a package deal, always. Then it goes to Planner, it creates a plan, it goes to OneNote, it goes to Power BI. Now, you got to be careful with this. An Office 365 group is generated no matter from which product you start with. Now, I didn't even go over Microsoft Teams, which by default does not come with an Office 365 group. It only comes with an Office 365 group if you manually choose to. So this can be done by saying you want to add the Microsoft Teams to an existing Office 365 group, or if you start from Microsoft Teams and say create a new team, it will then generate the Office 365 group with everything in it. Yammer is mad at Microsoft Teams and Exchange, so it's not going to be available if you choose one of these three for your Office 365 group. In fact, this at the top is the default behavior for an Office 365 group. But if you go to Yammer and you create a new Yammer group, it's going to replace these three and create the rest. What I'm trying to say is people don't realize, I'll tell you a story that happened at the office. I have a new data team, right? 2 years ago, new data team, data scientists, however you want to call them these days, and they want to analyze our data, create some charts, some forecasting, just analyze what's going on in our company. So what did they do? They went to Power BI. They had no idea what Office 365 was. They have no idea what Office 365 groups are. And they just kept clicking on Power BI, create new Power BI workspace, create new workspace, create new workspace, create new workspace. And they just created new places to like play around with Power BI or build different dashboards. All of a sudden, because they kept creating new Power BI workspaces, it generated a planner, it generated a SharePoint, so it reserved the new URL, but even more important, it generated a mailbox, which means it generated an email address. So you got to start thinking about how are you going to manage that when people don't even understand or realize what's going on. It's the same thing with Teams that generates these SharePoint, worried about duplicates. There's a ton of things to look into. But essentially, after you've created Office 365 groups, there's a ton of way to extend the Office 365 group in the various products, whether it's Flow Power Apps, whether it's connectors and bots, whether it's the SharePoint framework for SharePoint. There's a ton of way to extend your Office 365 group. What's important for you to understand first and foremost is that it's a new security group in Active Directory that has a little script that goes and creates everything without exception all the time. The script will be launched no matter what product you start from to create your object. Facts to consider, we're actually very far. This is something I built almost 2 years ago and was the roadmap for groups in SharePoint. The first thing they did is every new Office 365 groups and every new team site will have an Office 365 group. Phase 2 was standalone team sites can be upgraded into an Office 365 group. This is already rolled out. That means if you have a SharePoint site collection that has either no subsite or you're ready to convert it into an Office 365 group, you can using a little click of a button or PowerShell command lines. And the independent SharePoint can now be done as well. You can always create independent SharePoint sites. They're not removing the capacity or capability to do those, but really what they're trying to push everyone towards is a world of Office 365 groups for collaboration and SharePoint communication sites or Yammer for outer communication. See it this way. If you're a team of people that's going to work on something to get work done, you're going to be creating a group, you're collaborating, you're what Microsoft calls inner loop. If you want to turn around outside of your immediate group of people collaborating or getting work done, and you want to communicate information, you want to talk to people outside of your team or your department, you're going to be using communication sites with or Yammer. There's a number of things that you take into consideration. You need to be the site collection administrator. You can disable guest access or external sharing if you want to, but this is essentially the roadmap that Microsoft had. So then I started asking questions. I started asking the question, what kind of SharePoint Online experience are you currently using? And I saw that more and more people are split. Some people are using classic SharePoint, modern SharePoint, and modern SharePoint connected to Office 365 groups. And these are the number of people surveyed. And we're starting to see a pretty equal split over all of these. Then we asked about whether self-service and teams are on. So yes, everyone can create groups. This is self-service. You can specify which group and only the IT team. So we can see that a growing number of people are allowing self-service in their environment, but this will yield to other consideration or governance issues, if you will. These are the things we're going to dive into. If you want to start with a highlight of the things that you'll want to make sure happens in your environment, and take it from me, I've seen it happen a dozen of times with especially larger customers like a bank with thousands and thousands of end users, with restrictions, with audits, with basically compliance issues, as well as I've seen a very small company with a few hundred users that just has an open culture, transparency. They still run to similar issues that needs to be looked at. Naming conventions. right? If you enable things like self-service, or people can create things that go and generate an email address, a SharePoint site collection with a URL, you need to make sure there's a naming convention. Otherwise, you're going to get up with it, marketing. Okay, what is it for? Or you'll have somebody in the marketing team that's just going to create a group called Vision, because they are in their marketing context and don't realize that Vision could be a site for anyone in any department. So we could have naming conventions and set up some things like prefixes and things like this. Lifecycle management for Office 365 groups is right now one of the biggest worries that I see, is basically content sprawl. You let people create things, you don't understand why it was created, you're not confident enough to delete it in case it is required, you don't know anything. And what happens is, over time, you show up, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of not just SharePoint site collections, Office 365 groups, which generate email, which generate site collection URLs that have been reserved, which generate a bunch of things, makes it harder to search for things, makes it harder to find things, and it's just overall hard to manage. Preventing content duplication. Check this out. I just created a team site with you, right? And the URL is ESPC19 Prague. So it generated an Office 365 group. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this site just so you know which one it is. I'm going to edit it, and I'm going to add a bunch of words. I'm going to put some text, and I'm going to put just this over here. Excellent. Let's publish this. And we'll know that this is this site collection. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to teams.microsoft.com. Is it going to do that thing that it always does for me? Probably will. We'll see. How's everybody doing? Having a good time? I'll be sure to check the questions when we get to the end of the... Yeah, we're good. Excellent. So I'm here, and it's asking me to create a Microsoft Teams. If I create SPC19 Prague, right, and I'm going to set it to a private one, actually, and click on Next, skip for adding members, check this out. I have created ESPC19 Prague again. Now, if I open the SharePoint that comes with this Microsoft Teams, remember, it's Office 365 groups. Okay, it takes a few seconds to create. Remember, it's an Office 365 group, right? So no matter which product you choose to create your collab space from, all of the other products have been created always. Now, if I open the SharePoint, hopefully it's done. There we go. Look at the URL, and let's go to the home page. I have ESPC19 Prague. Let's go to the home page. And I have the previous ESPC19 Prague. This is the original with the good URL. I went to Microsoft Teams. I generated a new site collection or a new Office 365 group. And because the name was already taken, it just added a bunch of numbers at the end. Oh, yep. So imagine this. Again, end users don't care about your technology, don't care about your concerns, your worries, your governance. They just want to create things and get work done. And this happens systematically in every organization, even my own, where not even but 2 weeks ago, I had someone in the marketing team go to Microsoft Teams and said, oh, we should try Microsoft Teams for our group of people in marketing. So they went to Microsoft Teams and they created a team called marketing to chat, because for them, it's another product. And that makes complete sense. How can I tell them you're wrong? It makes complete sense, right? What they didn't realize is that they just duplicated the marketing team. Now I have the Office 365 group marketing, which could have its own Microsoft Teams. Instead, I have a second Office 365 group called Marketing 900, and I have essentially duplicated my data. Look at this. What they should have done is when they click on Create a Team, at the bottom of this screen, remember this screen? What they should have known is to click on this one. Create a team for an existing Office 365 group. Except no end user on the planet knows about this or thinks about this. Now, we'll get to the management of this in a few seconds. You have a couple of choices, but if you're about to deploy Microsoft Teams in your environment, I strongly recommend you teach people to create things from Microsoft Teams. It's easier to manage and remove the duplicates as much as possible. But there's other ways to go around it, and we're going to dive into them in just a few seconds. Other things that we're going to look into: classification, content location for hybrid environments, and ownership, regulation, permission management of this entire thing. So the slides are going to be available. I'll make sure that they're available. Essentially, I put hyperlinks. Actually, this is from Martina Grum. She did all the hard work, and I asked her if I could use the slide. It's a slide that allows you to jump to all of the Microsoft documentation on how you can managing permissions, naming policies, expiration policies, the soft delete and restore. So let me go quickly over what they are so that when you get the slides, you know what you can look into. And in the demos, I will jump into some of them as well. Creating permissions is simply who is allowed to create Office 365 group in your environment. Because self-service, of course, I'm all about self-service, right? I want people to be able to create the things they need to get work done. I think everybody does. But at some point in time, depending on the company, depending on the culture, let's be honest, it just doesn't, I can't go to this large bank customer that I have and tell them, yeah, just let people create whatever they want at any time. No, they have certain things that they need to make sure can happen. If they can make sure that everything's going to be regulated, there's going to be audited, that they're going to have validation that certain things they need to make sure happen, then maybe they'll consider one day self-service. Instead, what they've done is they've created a permission model where certain people in the company that have followed specific trainings can create Office 365 groups and then created a form that goes to the right person. Naming policies so that you can have prefix or suffixes automated at the end or beginning of your Office 365 group names. Expiration policies. What do you want to happen for the life cycle of your Office 365 group? What happens at the end? Do we delete it? There's a soft delete and restore. You have 30 days from the moment you delete an Office 365 group. That's the other challenge, guys, right? People might delete their SharePoint team site, not realizing they just deleted everything else that came with it, and then would like to restore the entire Office 365 group. However, you have only 30 days to comply. If you do not restore your Office 365 group within 30 days, it is gone after deletion. You can, of course, probably contact Microsoft to try and get it back from their backups, but you know how that goes. Hope you have some time on your hands. Guest access management. There's a ton of features that people don't know about to help you manage external users and guest access in your environment. We're going to go dive into those. Microsoft also provides built-in reporting, policy and information protection over your content, Azure AD access reviews. We're going to jump into that. It's hard to explain without showing you. So we're going to jump into that later and I'll explain. And of course, Microsoft has a built-in feature that allows you to upgrade your distribution lists in Exchange into Office 365 groups in Outlook, because this is where we're going. Oh, wow, time flies by. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go over the slides very quickly. And what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go over the demo now. So very quickly, all the slides that are coming up next, they're actually slides that I have for you to download and have the information for you. They're not actually slides for presentation. You'll notice because there's no more colors. So I'll have all of the information for group creation policy. There's PowerShell commandlets that allow, and there's the PowerShell commandlets that you can set up. Group creation policy is who in your organization is allowed to create Office 365 groups. So you can control self-service. You don't have to enable self-service at large, which, by the way, is the default behavior in a tenant. You can change that and organize who, what, when can create Office 365 groups so that you can delegate that adequately. Naming policies can happen via PowerShell or in the Exchange Admin Center, so you can add a prefix in front of your group name. Typically speaking, we often put the department name of the person who's creating the Office 365 group. but you can change that depending on different values. Tons of scripts that you can build. There's also some built scripts on GitHubs from various people. Very difficult for me to do. There's some scripts online. They're not perfect, but very difficult for you to do is figure out what Office 365 groups are no longer in use. Why? Because now we're not just talking about SharePoint, right? They may not be using SharePoint, they may not be using Mailbox, they may not be using Teams. Maybe they're really using your group for Planner a lot. So it's becoming difficult because Office 365 groups are across workloads and they don't all have an API yet available for us to figure out what's going on. So there's a number of reports that you can run that help you as much as possible figure out your Office 365 groups, but this is definitely going to be a challenge to figure out your obsolete Office 365 groups. There's tons of compliance available because it's the same as SharePoint and Mailbox, because Office 365 group is not a product, right? It's a centralized membership. It's a central place for the security groups. SharePoint is still SharePoint. Exchange is still Exchange. Nothing's changed. When people tell me, Ben, when do I use SharePoint? When do I use an Office 365 group? That makes no sense. That's not a question. That's like saying, when do I use a folder in my share drive and when do I use a security group? Well, they're two completely different things. One is to put people inside of it so you can grant access to things, and the other one is a folder to put content in it. You can create secret groups. This is the command line. Most people don't know about this. After the Office 365 group is created, even if you choose the group to be in private so that it's you have to request access to join it, it's still visible to the entire organization. If you don't want that, you need to use that PowerShell to remove that from visibility. There's also a flag at the bottom here. If you want the group members to have only read-only access to the calendar, which by default, they have full access to edit. Sometimes you want to create an Office 365 group, put people inside of it, allow them to be member of the Office 365 group for content, but not for the calendar. That's how you do it. Dynamic groups, you need to pay Azure AD Premium, but you can basically create a group membership based on a policy, based on values, variables. For example, everyone that has department equals marketing should be inside the group called marketing. If their department changes in their Active Directory profile, this changes as well. Multi-domain support. If you're in an environment with multiple domains, like I am in my company, just because of brands, not necessarily because we're bigger, you want to make sure that within Office 365 group, since Office 365 groups get an email address, you want the email address to be the one you want to use in that business unit, in that department. You can change that as well. Guest user access, I'm going to go over all of that in just a second. And that brings me to the various guest access policies. I'm going to switch into the demo and then I'll finish up the 2 slides that are left. But essentially, the guest access, you have a couple of ways to do it. User managed, the person that owns the Office 365 group, or the based on a property, the title equals manager, is allowed to invite guests, which are guest equals external users, people outside of your company that log into your content without creating them a user account in your Active Directory. So you can set it up based on properties. You can say everyone in our company that has the job title that includes the word manager can invite external users to Office 365 groups. Can be done. That can be done. The other thing is domain manage. You go to the list of domains that you approve and the list of domains that you disapprove, whether you want to do whitelist or blacklist, so that anyone can invite anyone from outside of the organization as long as they are under @coca-cola.com or @pepsi.com, for example. And then lastly, group level. Group level means the group owner is allowed to add it, or only the IT admin can add it. So let's go into the demo, because there's a number of things that I want to show you. Let me close Teams, let me close the SharePoint stuff, and let's go back into the admin environment. And don't worry, we'll stick around. I'll stick around for questions in 10 minutes when we hit the 10 o'clock, or I think for you it's 4 o'clock. All right, so I'm gonna open up the various admin centers. So I like to click on all admin centers here. And there's a number of things since Office, it's interesting. Office 365 groups is something in Active Directory, but it generates a SharePoint. So some of the settings are in SharePoint, but it generates a Teams. So some of the settings are in Teams, but it generates an Exchange. So some of the settings are in Exchange. It can also generate a Yammer. So some of the settings are in Yammer. And then it also has reports that you will click on usage to get the report. It's all over the place. Some of the settings are in Active Directory. It's all over the place. First and foremost, let's start with the beginning. We clicked on Azure Active Directory, and we noticed a couple of things. Before I click on groups, you can click on user settings. And here you have a number of things that you can manage. But more importantly, it's where you can manage collaboration settings for external users. And this is where you can set up how you want external access to be managed. Guests can invite, members can invite, admins and users in the guest inviter role can invite. All of these are here. You can specify the domains that you want to allow, deny invitations to specific domains. So everything we talked about will be here in Active Directory, which most people don't realize. Azure Active Directory is a big part of what you'll be doing to manage Office 365 groups, since Office 365 groups is an Active Directory. Click on groups, and before you click on individual groups to see what's going on, you have three settings: general, expiration, access reviews. General, you'll have some very basic things like, do you want to allow self-service, or do you want to restrict access to groups in the access panel? Security groups, users can create security groups. I'm not going to go, I think you can read and figure some of the things out. We've talked about it. I don't want to waste your time either, of course. But you have some of the general settings for Office 365 groups and who can create these groups in your environment. You can do it this way. You can do it via Office PowerShell, or you can do it via even custom solutions. Expiration, I'm not a big fan. I'm not going to lie to you for two reasons. First, it requires Azure AD Premium, so you don't have it for free. You need to go pay for this. And on top of that, the way that it works, actually I shouldn't say this. You make up your own mind. All I'm going to do is give you the information. But basically, you have a group lifetime in days. So you can say after 60 days, 180 days, 365 days from the creation date, right? It doesn't look at the activity. It's based on the creation date. An email will be sent to the owners. If there's no owners, you can specify the email address you want it to go to. And you can apply this rule to all of your Office 365 groups or the ones you manually selected. If you manually select them, it's one at a time, right? You choose the one you want to add. And when you add them, if new Office 365 groups are created, you're going to have to manually come back here and put the policy again and add them manually, of course, because they're only the ones selected. What happens? Group owners must have the Exchange license. They'll get a notification email. And if they don't renew the Office 365 group, the group is going to be deleted. If they don't act on the email in a certain lapse of time, Microsoft considers the group to not be active anymore and deletes it. So that's the information. You do what you will with that information. I'm not a big fan because I think it should be based on the activity inside of the Office 365 group and not the creation date of the Office 365 group. But that's the expiration policy. Lastly, you have access reviews. Access reviews is essentially, as soon as it loads, but essentially what it allows you to do is create an access review. And there's two main ways to do this. It can be for members of a group. Okay, I didn't even explain what it is. Forget all the things that you're seeing because that's going to confuse you. An access review is a scheduled way for you to ask someone, typically speaking, the owners of the Office 365 group, to review the either guest users or all of the members of the Office 365 group. So here's what that means is, I'm going to click on New Access Review. You give it a name. When it starts, how frequently you want this to be done. Is it a one-time thing? You want to get an audit, you want to get the report back and done? Do you want to do this annually? Do you want to do this quarterly? And essentially you can say when it ends, if it's a one-time, who are the users that you would like to review? Members of a group, the guest users, or everyone? So who do you want to review inside of your Office 365 group membership? What's the access you want to review? Let's say guest users only, or let's say everyone. Unfortunately, you have to do this group by group. The last time I checked, at the very least, maybe no, you can still only choose one at a time, select. And now what's going to happen is for the group conference, the owners, the group owners, the reviewers, you can do this as a selected users. This can be members themselves. The person in question can validate whether or not they still should be in this Office 365 group. An email will be sent on the date you specified, on the frequency you specified, and this person that you select here will have to review everyone or the guest users. I like the one for the guest users, and I like to schedule that at least once every quarter. You do whatever you think is best, but it's nice because as we move to a decentralized world where people can create their own Office 365 group, IT is no longer really close to what's being done inside of the workloads, inside of the products. You want to stay on top of that. You want to stay on top of your governance plan. And one way to do it is to get some help or ask the group owners to participate very lightly in some of the actions, whether it's to validate the external users in their group, because how is IT going to do that? How are you going to know whether that external user has a good access or not? How do you know? You have to go ask the group owner, right? You need to know someone in that context that can tell you that. So this is the access reviews. The next thing I want to go over while we're here is inside of the SharePoint Admin Center. Make sure I don't go over too much time here. Inside of the SharePoint Admin Center, so let's go to the real Admin Center here. There's a number of things that you can manage, from the sharing settings that you can specify, sharing links, with access control as well on what you can be done, settings here that you want to manage, site creation, whether they're self-service on or off. And all of this will allow you to see from the active sites console all of your SharePoint team sites that are connected to an Office 365 group. So team site, these are all of our Office 365 team sites that are connected to an Office 365 group and what their hub site association are. This is one way to do it, and you can also go to the OneDrive Admin Center and you'll see some other settings regarding the sharing if you would like. Other admin capabilities will be across these other settings. You have all of your Office 365 groups here on the groups with some very basic settings. I almost never do anything here. You can go to the Exchange Admin Center if you want to upgrade your distribution list into Office 365 groups. So very quickly, I click on Exchange. I will then get to a page where I can click on Office 365 groups here. And you will have the capability to convert with this button or this button to convert a distribution list into an Office 365 group. Sorry, this one. Or this button right here. So you have a number of settings and compliance that you can do there. For reports, you click right from the Home Admin Center, click on Usage, and most people don't realize it or haven't seen it. What you have to do is actually click on Select Report first, go to Office 365, and under Groups Activity, you'll have for the last 30 days, for the last 90 days, for the last 180 days, the activity for all of your Office 365 groups. Now you have a number of columns here. You can add the columns that you want to see. There's a ton of them, the group owner, whether it's deleted, whether it has members, external members. You can also export this into a CSV, which will give you a complete, I don't even see, there it is, which will give you a complete detailed information list of all of your Office 365 groups and the info you'd like to see about them. Now, of course, this is my demo environment. It doesn't have that much, but you could tell in your own environment how much information you'd be able to gather. You can then look at the activity, the files for your Office 365 group, and your storage. I then invite you to go to Security and Compliance Center. Actually, not the reports, the actual Security and Compliance Center. This is where most of your administration will happen, most of them. And the reason I say this is Microsoft is moving away from putting security or administration of products with individual products and centralizing your management cross-product, cross-governance in one place, and that's the Security and Compliance Center. Get to know this console because this is the future of managing Office 365. This is where you'll be able to go to classifications and set up labels, and then apply policies to your labels. Labels are associated to your Office 365 groups themselves and every product inside of it, or they can be applied to individual documents. For the purpose of this webinar, I'm obviously talking about the classification for an Office 365 group itself. We're getting close to the end, so I'm going to go very quickly, but you can create a label on the sensitivity to manage content marking, to manage, let me just put a few things here just so we can go through it, whether you want encryption or not, and whether you want content marking, add a watermark and a footer to everything that's going to be created under this label or attached to this label. The same thing for retention policies, right? You create your label, you say what it applies to, what happens with this label, what is the retention policy, and then you go and apply to wherever you want using label or publishing of labels. The ability to centralize your settings to a classification label or to a basically to a tag, if you will, instead of individual products is where we're going. You want to say anyone that creates an Office 365 group that is private and that is classified or has a classification label as patent, you want to disable external sharing and disable OneDrive for Business sync to offline, instead of going one by one to your different libraries and setting that up. This is where Microsoft is heading. It's already here today. This is how it works. Make sure that you set up your classification label and make sure you spend some time under the classifications as well as the data governance section of your environment so you can set up and see the labels applied, where they're being used. When you come and you decide that you're going to create a new Office 365 group, so let's quickly create another SharePoint. I'm not going to go through the whole steps, but you click on Create Site, you give it a name, and then you have to choose the classification label. You can customize them, and when they apply in the future, you'll have these automatic security and retention policies based on this, plus possibly the email address, and however you want to tailor that. And then disable external users, disable OneDrive for Business sync, disabling download files, adding a watermark. All of these things can be automated. No matter what product people are using, you go to their intent. What are they trying to achieve? What are they trying to do? All right, we've seen a lot of things. I hope there's been some value for you. Quickly, there's a summary of things I recommend you to do. Switch from classic to modern SharePoint and go flat. Figure out what your provisioning cycle looks like to get ready for self-service later on. Will you enable full-on self-service? Will you specify groups of people to have self-service turned on? Do you want to create a Power App with a Microsoft Flow to gather the information and automate the process and control the process? Figure out what your expiration and retention policy are and how you're going to get visibility on a growing environment, because trust me, the number of customers who've called me and said, I woke up to 500 new Office 365 groups created this morning. What do I do, Ben? Is ever growing. I hear it all the time. Think about your cross-product governance. How are you going to manage things at the cross-product level? Forget the individual products. They're tools to get work done. If you want to manage them, you do it at Azure Active Directory. You create classification labels, content labels, external sharing policies. You do it at the Security and Compliance Center. If you want to take a self-service approach, I recommend, if you are deploying Teams, to go it through Teams, because Microsoft Teams does not check for duplicate URLs or names. So it's better to go straight from there instead of possibly creating in SharePoint, then duplicating it in Teams when people want to get that done. And try to make owners accountable. I'm not saying put all of the work on them, but since they're the ones in self-service, they're the ones that are creating content, try to decentralize some of the things, some of the questions. A very quick thing, hey, can you check the access review once every quarter? Can you tell me the external users are okay so that I have a report that has been validated, so that if we get audited every 3 months for financial reasons because we're a bank, well, we can say that you've validated and it's okay. Some recommendations: the Jobs to be Done book that I mentioned earlier, jobstobedone.com, download for free PDF, and become a product team. Switch the mindset. Stop looking for SharePoint user group and start looking at product team user groups and content and books. How can you switch? Yes, you're IT. Yes, you're a company, but now you're providing a service that is the software for your customer, which is the users inside. Look at how to work as a product team to deliver the value as fast as possible, just as if you were selling a product. It will change a lot of things for you and help you deploy Office 365. I guarantee it. I have tons of content. I actually have a magazine that we wrote, but it's available via PDF. ShareGate.com/curated. You can get a ton of information on deploying Office 365 groups, on downloading a migration checklist. This is not me that wrote the content. This is people from Microsoft on the field side. This is MVPs. This is people that are expert that wrote a piece of that magazine that makes it the deployment and adoption of Office 365, including groups. Folks, thank you so much. I appreciate the time that you spent with me. I hope to see you in Prague at ESPC 19. I'm very excited for it. Thank you very much. Have an amazing day. I'll stick around for questions.
Thanks, Benjamin. Great presentation as always. Okay, we have some questions. We're a little bit over time, so I'm going to be very, very fast here, Benjamin, if that's okay. First question, in relation to the demo, is it possible to use existing AD security groups in Office 365 groups?
Not yet. So at the moment, Office 365 groups can only be with individual users, and you have to add them one by one. They know about this. It is something they worked on. It's in the backlog. They want you to be able to add a security group, and it automatically expands into individual users. They've already tested something out, and some people might have it in preview. But at the moment, it's still something. It's that and nested groups. To have groups within groups is not something possible at the moment.
Okay. How do you recommend using calendars in Teams for tracking vacation days off?
How do I recommend? Oof, that's a good question. There's no real good way to do so. There's some workarounds. I've tried to see some other applications for it because it's really like start date and end date. That's a tough question. Honestly, I find there's no good way. The best thing is obviously to use the Outlook calendar in the Office 365 group. We then embed it directly into the tabs in the Microsoft Teams. That's what Microsoft Teams power really is to just add the tabs. But then this depends on your process and how you want to do it. Putting the name of people in the name of the event and vacation, identifying that calendar is already for vacation. But since the calendar is made for collaboration first, I haven't found a really good solution without doing some customization in there.
Okay. Does the Power BI shared custom dashboard require a separate license per user in the group to access the dashboards?
Yes, it's Power BI Pro that needs to be paid for the people that are going to be using it in the Office 365 group. The entire company doesn't need to have Power BI Pro, but the people that are going to be using it will. Also, it's hard. Microsoft licensing is Microsoft licensing. I always encourage you to double check what I say about that. But you do require Power BI Pro to be able to have it connected to Office 365 groups.
Okay. Migrated file permissions, are they synced to the Office 365 group? Meaning if AD group department_HR are members of these, are these automatically added to the Office 365 group?
There's the only automation that exists for adding and removing people from Office 365 groups is called dynamic groups, and it's only available if you have Azure AD Premium. So under that context, yes, they're automatically added and they're automatically removed to answer your question, but it's important to note the context that this works in only.
Okay. Is the access review for all the licenses or only premiums in relation to the demo?
Yes, same thing, Azure AD Premium. All the good stuff, they want you to pay.
Okay, great. Can you move content belonging to one Office 365 group over to another Office 365 group if you want to merge two Office 365 groups?
Can you move, what was the first part? What can you move?
So can you move content belonging to one Office 365
Okay,
group over
so
to
this is
another Office
tricky.
365 group? Okay.
Yeah, so
So you want to
from
merge two Office 365 groups.
yeah, from anywhere to anywhere, to be honest, you can definitely move content. It's typically almost one at a time. You have to go document library to document library or list by list and select them and then move to or copy to. So Microsoft came out with the copy button, but the library has to exist, the structure has to exist, and yes, you can copy the content, you can move the content. It keeps the basic metadata like created date, modified date. It just won't keep all of your metadata, and it won't copy your structure like your libraries, your columns, your settings. It's just for strictly content, but yes, that's definitely possible. If you select your document, you'll see a button in the what do you call it, the command bar, and that shows up that says copy to.
Okay. Benjamin, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it on behalf of the entire
Thank you.
European
Love
SharePoint
ESPP
365
and
and Azure
always love going to
community.
the conference. Thank
Great.
you.
Benjamin, have a lovely day. Thank you for your time.
You too. Have a great day.
Thank you. Okay, everybody, please see sharepointeurope.com/register-for-webinars for further details on all upcoming webinars, or visit our resource center for all previous webinars. And we will also add today's webinar to the resource center, and you'll be notified by email when it is available. Thank you all for joining us today, and a big thank you again to Benjamin Niaulin for his time. Very much appreciated. Take care and goodbye.